They called it the Buzzsaw, a machine gun so fast, so lethal, that soldiers swore it could cut a man in half before he even touched the ground. The MG42 didn't just kill, it dominated the battlefield, leaving both physical and psychological scars that would haunt survivors for life. In this video, we'll uncover the dark reason why this weapon was considered too perfect for war. You'll see why its sound alone could paralyze entire squads, how it outclassed everything the Allies had, and later, the one hidden flaw that may have been the only thing keeping it from rewriting the entire course of World War II. By the early years of World War II, German infantry doctrine had already broken away from the way most armies fought. While the Allies put rifles at the center of their squads, Germany's entire approach revolved around one thing: the machine gun. The MG34, their first general-purpose machine gun, was a marvel of pre-war engineering. It could perform as a light or heavy weapon, had an impressive rate of fire, and unmatched build quality. But there was a problem. It was too perfect in the wrong way. The MG34's precision machine parts took too long to produce, required highly skilled labor, and jammed more easily in dirt or mud. In the mud of the Eastern Front and the sand of North Africa, this was a liability. Germany needed something just as deadly, but faster and cheaper to build. The answer came in 1942, the MG42. It was everything the MG34 was not. Faster to make, easier to maintain, and terrifyingly lethal in battle. Its stamped steel parts could be mass-produced in a fraction of the time. It was simpler to operate, even for inexperienced soldiers. But what emerged from those design priorities was something far beyond a replacement. The MG42 was efficient to the point of horror. A gun capable of throwing so many bullets in so little time that it would redefine what suppression meant. Allied troops would soon learn that this wasn't just another German gun. This was the kind of weapon that could change the psychology of the battlefield itself. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. The MG42 was built with one goal: to put out as much firepower as possible in the shortest time, and to do it without the manufacturing headaches of the MG34. The changes started with how it was made. Instead of painstakingly machined components, the MG42 used stamped and welded steel parts, which cut production time nearly in half. Looser tolerances meant it could handle mud, sand, and debris without the jams that plagued its predecessor. In a war where weapons had to survive the worst possible conditions, this was a game changer. Its action was recoil-operated with a roller locking system, a design that let it fire at a blistering 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute. That was roughly double the rate of fire of American and British machine guns, and even faster than the MG34. To put it simply, it could put 20 to 25 bullets in the air every second. Instead of the steady thud-thud-thud of Allied guns, the MG42 sounded like a single tearing roar, earning it the nickname Buzzsaw. The psychological effect was immediate. The sound alone was enough to make soldiers hesitate, freeze, or dive for cover. Then there was its quick-change barrel system. The gun could overheat in seconds at full rate, but with a lever on the side, a trained crew could swap in a cool barrel in under 20 seconds. This meant it could keep firing almost without pause. Combined with belt-fed ammunition, the MG42 could saturate an area with lead for far longer than most enemies could endure. On paper, it was a perfect blend of production efficiency and battlefield dominance. In practice, it was something darker. A weapon that could break not just bodies, but morale. To understand why the MG42 gained its infamous reputation, you have to imagine being on the wrong end of it. In a firefight, A single burst could rip through multiple soldiers before anyone even realized they'd been hit. At 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, there was no time to think, no time to react. Just a wall of bullets tearing through everything in their path. Survivors often recalled the sound more than the sight, describing it as a continuous ripping noise that made it impossible to count individual shots. It didn't sound like a machine gun. It sounded like the end of your life. The MG42 didn't just kill, it controlled. Entire units could be pinned down by a single well-placed gun, their movements frozen because the moment anyone lifted their head, the buzzsaw would cut them down. Even when it wasn't firing, the threat of it was enough to alter how enemy troops moved across the battlefield. American and British soldiers were taught to recognize the sound in training, but no amount of preparation could erase the instinctive fear it caused. This rate of fire came with trade-offs. It burned through ammunition at an incredible rate, and accuracy in long bursts suffered. But those drawbacks didn't matter in the chaos of combat. The MG42's role wasn't to score careful, aimed hits. It was to overwhelm, to suppress, to dominate the battlefield before the enemy could even mount a counterattack. And in that role, it was flawless, maybe too flawless. Later in the war, even German soldiers would admit that it was almost frightening how well it did exactly what it was designed to do. In most Allied armies during World War II, the machine gun was a support weapon, there to back up the riflemen. In the German army, it was the other way around. The MG42 wasn't just a tool in the squad, it was the squad's reason for existing. Every German infantry section was built around its machine gun, and every other soldier was there to keep it fed, protected, and firing. If the MG42 was the heart, the rest of the squad were its arteries, carrying ammunition, replacing barrels, spotting targets, and guarding the crew. A standard 10-man German squad often had just one MG42, but that single gun could dominate a battlefield sector. In defense, it would be placed to cover open ground with overlapping fields of fire, turning any attempted advance into a gauntlet of lead. In offense, it laid down suppressive bursts while the rest of the squad maneuvered. The MG42's bipod made it mobile enough to reposition quickly, but when mounted on a Lafette tripod, it became a precision long-range weapon with optical sights, capable of accurate fire well beyond 1,000 meters. This central role meant that an MG42 wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was a tactical philosophy. The Germans believed that control of the fight came from controlling the enemy's movement, and the MG42 could do that better than anything else in the war. On the Eastern Front, Soviet troops quickly learned to identify its signature sound, and often halted their advances the moment they heard it. In Normandy, entire American platoons were pinned down by one well-sighted MG42 nest. But this dominance came at a price. The moment an MG42 opened fire, it became the #1 target for every enemy weapon in range. Gunners were hunted relentlessly by snipers, mortars, and artillery. To keep the gun alive, crews had to be fast, disciplined, and ready to relocate in seconds. This high-risk, high-reward dynamic made MG42 teams both the most feared and the most vulnerable soldiers in the German army, a reality that would weigh heavily on those who operated it. The MG42's lethality wasn't just measured in casualties, it was measured in hesitation. It was a weapon designed to seize control of the battlefield by stopping enemy troops from moving, thinking, or even breathing without fear. The sound of its fire was so distinct and so rapid that Allied soldiers often froze the moment it erupted. It didn't give them the rhythmic warning of a slower gun. It was just a ripping wall of noise that meant death could arrive before they took their next step. In training, American and British troops were warned about this psychological effect. In fact, the U.S. military produced a propaganda film claiming the MG42's bark was worse than its bite, an attempt to convince soldiers that they could face it without fear. But the men who fought against it knew better. Survivors described the sound as unlike any other on the battlefield, saying it made the air itself feel dangerous. Even experienced troops admitted that the first burst in a fight could send adrenaline spiking and force them to instinctively hug the dirt. The psychological toll was amplified by the MG42's ability to keep firing almost endlessly. With a quick change barrel and enough ammunition, it could maintain suppressive fire far longer than most Allied guns. This meant that even if you weren't hit, you could be pinned down for minutes, unable to move, watching the seconds slip away as your mission fell apart. In many cases, the paralysis it caused was more valuable to German forces than the kills themselves. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers reported that MG42 fire could halt entire waves of infantry. In Normandy, U.S. troops often had to call in artillery or tanks just to silence a single gun. It was more than a weapon, it was a psychological trap. You could survive a battle without being shot, but if you faced an MG42, you would remember the sound for the rest of your life. And it's here that the line between battlefield dominance and something darker begins to blur. While the MG42 terrified those who faced it, it also demanded everything from the men who used it. Being an MG42 gunner was a high honor in the German army, but it was also a death sentence waiting to happen. Once that first burst went out, every Allied soldier in earshot knew exactly where the gun was, and they would throw everything they had at it. Gunners were often the first to die in an engagement, targeted by snipers, mortars, and concentrated rifle fire. The job was physically brutal. The gun itself weighed over 25 pounds, and when you added spare barrels, tripods, and hundreds of rounds of belted ammunition, a gun team could be hauling over 100 pounds of gear. Firing the weapon was punishing too. The recoil, muzzle blast, and constant heat meant a gunner had to be strong, focused, and quick under pressure. Changing barrels in under 20 seconds wasn't just a skill, it was survival. Let the barrel overheat, and the gun could seize up at the worst possible moment. Mentally, the job was just as demanding. Gunners knew they were responsible for holding entire sectors of the line. If they failed, the enemy could break through. Some took pride in the MG42's fearsome reputation, while others admitted that its efficiency was unsettling, the way it could turn advancing soldiers into lifeless shapes in seconds. For some, that image stayed long after the war ended. The camaraderie between gunner and assistant was unmatched. They depended on each other for survival. One kept the gun firing, while the other fed belts, swapped barrels, and kept watch for flanking enemies. But they also shared the knowledge that if one of them went down, the other's odds of making it out alive dropped sharply. The MG42 gave its crews unmatched power on the battlefield, but it demanded everything in return. In a way, that was its darkest truth. It didn't just consume ammunition, it consumed the men who used it. Before the MG42, there was the MG34, a weapon often called the first truly general-purpose machine gun. It could be used on a bipod for mobile fire or on a tripod for sustained long-range defense. On paper, it was exceptional. It had good accuracy, a respectable 800 to 900 rounds per minute, and high build quality. But its greatest strength was also its fatal weakness. The MG34 was over-engineered to the point of fragility. Its finely machined internals required time, precision, and expensive materials to produce. In peacetime, this was a badge of pride. in total war, it was a problem. Mud and sand could easily jam its tighter tolerances, and manufacturing bottlenecks meant Germany couldn't arm every squad with one fast enough. The MG42 solved those problems, but at a cost that made it infamous. Its stamped steel construction could be assembled in less than half the time it took to make an MG34. It shed unnecessary complexity and embraced a philosophy of sheer output over elegance. The rate of fire leapt to 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, creating that continuous roar Allied troops came to dread. Barrel changes were faster, parts were easier to swap, and it shrugged off dirt and weather in ways the MG34 couldn't match. In direct comparison, the MG42 sacrificed a bit of accuracy and prolonged fire for overwhelming suppression. The MG34 could hit targets at long range with a steadier rhythm, but the MG42 didn't need to. Its role was to dominate space and deny movement. Crews often kept both guns in service during the war, but production priorities made the MG42 the workhorse. What emerged from this shift was something almost unnatural in its efficiency. A machine gun stripped of refinement and dedicated purely to battlefield dominance. And that was the first step toward its reputation as being too perfect for war. When Allied troops first faced the MG42, they quickly realized they were up against something entirely different. The standard American Browning M1919 machine gun was slower, firing around 500 to 600 rounds per minute. It was heavier, less mobile, and required more time to change barrels. In prolonged fights, its slower rate conserved ammunition and aided accuracy, but it couldn't match the MG42's ability to saturate an area with fire. The British Bren gun, loved for its reliability and accuracy, faced similar issues. Its 30-round box magazine meant frequent reloads, a dangerous pause when under counterfire from a belt-fed MG42 that could keep going for hundreds of rounds. Soviet troops with the DP-27 ran into the same problem, their pan magazines emptying in seconds while German gunners just kept firing. The only Allied weapon with remotely comparable suppressive power was the water-cooled Browning M1917 heavy machine gun, but it was bulky, crew-intensive, and far less mobile. In practice, this meant German infantry could dominate smaller engagements even when outnumbered. A single MG42 team could pin down a platoon, forcing them to call in mortars, tanks, or artillery to silence it. Allied doctrine shifted to counter this. More smoke cover, more flanking maneuvers, and heavy emphasis on combined arms assaults. Yet even with planning, engaging an MG42 position was always costly. What made it worse for the Allies was the MG42's sound. Soldiers could hear it before they saw it, and that sound told them they were already in danger. You couldn't easily suppress that kind of psychological impact. On the battlefield, it created a new kind of overmatch, not just in firepower, but in fear. And while the Allies could eventually overwhelm German positions with numbers and fire support, at the small unit level, the MG42's dominance was unmatched. By the end of the war, the MG42 had left its mark on every front it fought on. Over 400,000 units had been produced, and its influence would extend far beyond 1945. West Germany adopted it as the MG3, rechambered for NATO ammunition, and it served well into the late 20th century. Its roller locking system inspired designs like the American M60, the Belgian FNMAG, and even influenced the Soviet PK series. In many ways, the MG42 became the blueprint for modern general-purpose machine guns. But its legacy is not just technical, it's psychological and moral. Soldiers who faced it remembered the fear it caused as vividly as the casualties it inflicted. Even German veterans who fired it sometimes admitted to being unsettled by its efficiency. It reduced the act of killing to an almost mechanical process, stripping away any pretense of chivalry in combat. There's a reason so many called it too perfect for war, because it was built to do one thing, and it did that one thing with relentless precision. Its perfection was also its warning. The MG42 demonstrated how far industrial warfare could push the boundaries of lethality, and how technology could change the very nature of a fight. The Allies eventually overcame it with superior numbers, firepower, and logistics, but never because they fielded a better infantry gun. The MG42 remained a weapon that could decide the fate of an engagement in seconds. Today, it stands as both a marvel of engineering and a chilling reminder of what happens when human ingenuity is directed toward the singular goal of efficient killing. It was fast to make, devastating in action, and feared by all who encountered it. And perhaps that is the truest reason it was too perfect for war, because it left no room for anything else.